September 23rd, 1952, Castle Studios, Nashville, Tennessee. Hank Williams walks into the studio looking like a man with something to prove or something to confess. Little did anyone know that that would be the very last time Hank stepped into a recording studio. He recorded 4 songs that day, the last of which was aimed at a woman who broke his heart, a woman he loved more than anything else in the world, a woman he hated almost as much. This is the story of Your Cheatin Heart. Hey everybody, welcome back to Highway to Hank. I'm your host, Jason Petty. For the last 30 years, I've had the honor of portraying Mr. Hank Williams on stages all across the world, including 2 years at the world-famous Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee, and also off-Broadway in New York City, where I was lucky enough to win the Obie Award for Best Actor for my portrayal of Hank Williams. And I'm still touring with my own shows, paying tribute to Hank Williams and classic country music. But of those people that I met, I wrote their stories down, the ones that knew Hank, especially this next one. This was told to me by my good friend, Don Helms. Don was Hank Williams' best friend and his steel guitar player. Today we're going to be telling you the story of Your Cheatin Heart, maybe the most iconic Hank Williams song of all time, certainly one of the most recognizable. But if you know Hank Williams music, there are a ton of recognizable Hank Williams songs. But I still remember hearing Your Cheatin Heart as a Super Bowl commercial. And it was for Pepsi, I think. And they showed the Coca-Cola guy bringing in the stack of Coca-Colas into a gas station. And, you know, he's going to stock them. And he was getting real thirsty. And he saw a Pepsi out of the corner of his eye, and he wanted it. And so he reaches in to drink it, and all of a sudden, Your Cheatin Heart starts playing over the intercom. I still remember that commercial. And of course, old Hank made a bunch of money, or at least his estate did, and the songwriting company as well. But this story is about how Hank came to write that song. And it was written during the summer of 1952, the last year that Hank was alive. As many of you know, Hank Williams' first wife's name was Audrey, and she was truly the love of Hank's life. But she was also the focal point of a lot of his songwriting, good times and bad times as well. A lot of the cheating stuff, that's about Audrey. A lot of the hurting songs, that's Audrey hurt him. And I say that because I think she truly was the one that touched the spot of Hank Williams, that she was the one, but they were like oil and water. They just didn't mix. And so they divorced in the spring of 1952. And by this time, Hank was bad into taking pills for his back, drinking heavily now, no showing a lot of shows. And by August, the Grand Ole Opry fired Hank Williams. He was in a bad way, but the folks down in Louisiana at the Louisiana Hayride took Hank back. And he got down to Louisiana and he met this gal, 19-year-old gal from Louisiana by the name of Billie Jean Jones. And she was beautiful. And Hank thought, wow, first of all, she's beautiful. And he liked her very, very much. And so he started dating her. Matter of fact, I'm going to tell you that story in another episode of how he stole her away from another country music artist. But the story of Billie Jean is an incredible one too. And she went on to marry another famous country music artist after Hank passed away. But she and Hank are now dating. This is the summer of 1952. And of course, his mind is still on this woman, Audrey Mae Shepherd Williams, the wife that he loved, but he just couldn't live with. And so She had cheated on him several times, and I'm sure he had cheated on her as well, but he couldn't get past that. And so he and Billie Jean are driving down the road one day in the car, and this idea comes to him about Your Cheatin' Heart. And he said, honey, take out a piece of paper and a pencil, write these lyrics down. And in 10 or 15 minutes, he had dictated that entire song to Billie Jean, and she had written down the lyrics. The irony is, Audrey's successor, who became Hank's second wife, wrote the lyrics to Your Cheatin' Heart as they were dictated to her by Hank Williams. I think that's one of the great ironies in this business. But anyway, so now they had decided on a recording session back in Nashville, Tennessee. Of course, Hank wasn't playing at the Opry anymore, but he was still recording in Nashville, and Fred Rose was still his manager. So they set up a 4-song recording session, September the 23rd, 1952, at Castle Studios. Hank walks in. There's his old buddy, Don Helms. Now, Don told me this story himself, and he told it slightly different than I had ever heard it before, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. Hank walks in, and he's got 4 songs. And the 4 songs he was going to record that day were one that he didn't write, one that was written by Fred Rose, called Take These Chains From My Heart and Set Me Free. The other one was Call Elijah, that Hank wrote, about the wooden Indian. And that's just a fantastic song in and of itself. It's one of the first songs I ever heard that Hank Williams sang. The other one was written for Billie Jean. It was written about Billie Jean. It was called I Could Never Be Ashamed of You. And then, of course, the 4th one was written about Audrey, called Your Cheatin' Heart. And so they went through and did the first 3 songs, and they had, Hank had to sort of play the melody out for them, and they got everything ready. Matter of fact, the guitar player on that last session for Hank was Chet Atkins, famous record producer and guitar player, and Don Helms was on steel. And so they take a few takes to do all these songs. By the time they got to the last one, Don tells me, he said, well, Hank sat down and he said, Don, I've got a new song called Your Cheatin' Heart. Don said, not another heart song, because Take These Chains From My Heart. And of course, Hank's biggest hit up till then was called Cold, Cold Heart. And Don just made a joke. He's like, not another heart song, Hank. And Hank said, yeah, but this one's different. This one's about Audrey. It's called Your Cheatin' Heart. And so he said Hank picked up the guitar and he played out the verse and the chorus. And he said, we're going to do verse and chorus, then we're going to do some solos in there with fiddle and steel, and then we're going to do another verse and chorus. And Don, he goes, I need you to come up with an intro and an outro. And he said, so give me something, Shag. He called Don Helms Shag. And so Don came up with it on the spot. And so he looked at everybody. Hank looked at everybody and said, all right, you got the chord changes? And everybody said, yeah. Roll tape. Got it in one take. Everything you hear on that song, Your Cheatin' Heart, they did it in one take. No overdubs, no touch-ups, raw, real, one shot. That's the song you hear today. There's not a second, a lot of times after someone dies, you'll hear this was the studio version, or this was the alternate take, or this was the alternate ending, or something. No, this is it. This is the end of Your Cheatin' Heart, beginning to end, one take, and you got it. And the song, was released after he died, because 100 days, Hank walked out of that studio on September the 23rd. This is what gets me. That couldn't happen today. You walk into a studio today in Nashville, you're there for a week, 2, 3 weeks sometimes to record an album. Hank recorded 4 #1 songs in one afternoon, and he got the last song in one take. Nobody does that anymore. That was the musical genius of Hank Williams. And it was raw and it was real, and it didn't need waxing or glossing or any of that kind of stuff that they do to today's records. This was the real deal. This was pain from Hank's heart. And it was the last song he ever recorded. And he walked out of that studio on September the 23rd, and 100 days later, Hank was dead. And that story is an amazing story of how the last song Hank ever recorded was written for the woman that he couldn't live without and he couldn't live with. And 70 years later, we're still singing it. I think old Hank got it right. Now, you know, Don Helms died in 2008. But before he died, he shared these stories with me. And he saw me write them down. I said, Don, I have to write this down. Because, I mean, if I don't, I'll forget it or I'll mess something up. He wanted these stories to be continued and carried on. And that's what we're doing here. And if you appreciate that, I would appreciate if you would go down and just hit that like button, just tap it. Doesn't cost you anything. Hit the subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything. And there's no obligation to have to, watch any more videos, but it would help this channel out immensely. And I would thank you from the bottom of my heart. Leave us a comment what your favorite Hank song is. What does Your Cheatin Heart mean to you? I read every single one of them, and I try to reply to every single one of them. That's the story of Your Cheatin Heart. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. And if the good Lord's willing and the creeks don't rise, we'll see you for too long.